Introduction Contact Reports Volume/Issue 7, Plejadisch-Plejarische Kontaktberichte Block 7, pages 271,291 Contact No. 240 to 260 from December 30, 1991 to February 3, 1998. Stats source date and time of contact Monday, 13th June 1994, 11:36 p.m. Translators DeepL Translator, Joseph Darmanin. Date of original translation Sunday, 20th October 2019. Corrections and improvements made. Stefan Zutt, Joseph Darmanin. Contact persons Ptaah. Contact report 249. Translation English translation 249th contact Monday, 13th June 1994, 11:36 p.m.
Hello, Eduard, my friend.
Hello, too. I am happy to see you.
Unfortunately, it took me some time to get here, because you were busy, and I did not want to disturb you. But the time slowly became too long for me, so I had to resort to cunning with tiredness. I did it only reluctantly, because...
You should not talk so loud because, as you can see, the door to Eva's office is still open. She's over there.
Do not worry, because she's fast asleep and cannot hear us. She will only wake up again when I am no longer here.
Well, that calms me down. So could I start with my questions right away?
First, I would like to give you the information you asked me to give at our last meeting, but these explanations should not necessarily be written down when you write down the report about our conversation.
Of course, the easiest way to do this is, as always, to simply omit the corresponding passage when transferring the call.
That's how I will keep it. But listen now, and then arrange everything according to my explanations.
Thank you for your comments.
Please explain my regret as well, but unfortunately, I could not do it any other way, including the prolonged persistence of the symptom.
I think that you will be given the necessary understanding and your actions will be properly understood. I think that everything is seen and understood from a humorous point of view.
Then I am reassured. So bring up your questions.
My first question once again refers to UFO sightings and so-called abductions by aliens. Can you tell me the number of alien races that are currently flying in and out of the Earth or doing their studies here or working here in any other way?
For many years they have always been the same, and in that number only 3. Our behavior towards them is that we observe them, and we do not interfere in their actions, doings and actions, even if they have no knowledge of our existence.
And do these 3 alien races have contacts to Earth people, or have they maintained contacts to Earth people of a simple kind or to military people and so on?
Already in a previous conversation, I have stated that I am not allowed to give any official information regarding any concerns if the questions refer to official or military concerns in connection with possibilities of contacts with non-terrestrial human intelligences.
Well then, what about ordinary people on Earth?
There are no contacts existing between the 3 groups or alien races except for investigation contacts in which terrestrial humans, plants and animals are or were actually contacted for test and investigation purposes, which does not mean, however, that the mass hysteria and mass psychosis of all those are actually based on such experiences, which claim that they have been kidnapped and investigated or even impregnated by alien beings. Truthfully, there are always only isolated cases here and there all over the world, which are extremely rare, but which cannot be regarded as contacts in the sense of an actual contact in the context of our case. From our entire side there is also only in your case such a contact, and no others, not even in telepathic form. Contacts that we maintain with Earth people are purely impulsive telepathic, so the persons contacted in this way have no knowledge of it, and assume that everything created by them is their very own work. Truthfully, however, much of the information for the creations and products and so on comes from us, brought into the human beings through the impulse telepathy contacts, which in any case are always unconscious for the recipient, so that he has no idea that the information and so on is being impulse telepathically planted into him.
when Earth human beings are lifted into extraterrestrial flying apparatus and examined by extraterrestrial human intelligences for examination purposes, you do not call these processes actual contacts, but rather investigation contacts. Together with Hans, I have coined the term examination contact in this context. Could this term be used?
This terminology is actually very good. Examination contact. This term also removes the sting from untruth that terrestrial humans would be kidnapped by alien beings. The truth is that the Earth foreigners, the extra-humanoids, see nothing wrong and above all no abduction in their examination contacts, but only a humane means to an end in order to carry out incidental studies from which new knowledge and so on is gained.
What about the fact that UFO sightings are made all over the world again and again? They cannot all be real.
That is right, but we have talked about it a lot. Very few percentages correspond to actual sightings. The rest is based on sensory illusions, charlatanism, dizziness, lies and deception, and so on.
What's this about? Quetzal once explained to me, as Simyase did, that Dan Fry, an American, actually had contact with aliens and took photos, but that he then destroyed these photos, after which somebody made forgeries and put them under his control, so that today there would be no real photos of alien flying objects that could be traced back to Dan Fry. The story about the origin of the extraterrestrials and their statements are also said to have been thoroughly falsified. Quetzal once explained this to me without this appearing in a contact report.
This corresponds to the actual event.
Well then, something about the pyramids. Recently I got a call from someone who deals commercially with pyramids. Of course I did not give him any information due to the commercial. On the other hand, I did not give any information because pyramids are not as harmless as people on Earth generally assume. It is a fact that not every material may be used for meditation pyramids, but only copper, because it is conductive for electrical energy and does not unfold in the interior of the pyramid those forces which can be psychologically dangerous for humans, as is the case with non-conductive material. Pyramids made of non-conductive material such as stone, plastic, glass, and crystal and so on have the property that cell tissue and so on mummifies inside, and in the right place cutting tools can change under certain circumstances because enormous forces gather at the right point due to the shape of the pyramid and influence everything there, which, however, does not happen with a conductive pyramid made of copper because under certain conditions such as mass, antenna and elevation, and so on, in the pyramid it is not possible to mummify the material. On the one hand, completely different and invigorating forces are developed and which are derived from outside impacting and all-changing force-developing oscillations. For this, however, a copper pyramid must be completely closed and secured. For some time now a pyramid boom has prevailed in various countries, so that pyramids of all kinds and sizes are traded commercially. Isn't there a danger that dangerous things can arise from this?
Such things, as you say, have existed for many years, so they do not have to appear first. But all those human beings who are or have been psychologically harmed by such pyramids know or did not know that their afflicted ills were triggered by pyramids of non-conductive materials. Pyramids are actually not as harmless as the human beings of Earth assume.
This is probably an evil that will spread even further.
That will be so.
Then I have something on my own. The meditation teachings I wrote I had learned fundamentally from Svarhoff and Asket, although I had already written a lot about it at a young age before I brought it into its final form and published it in the 70s. And precisely because of this meditation or the meditation book, it has now happened for the second time that I was accused of having copied my scripture from another book.
I am familiar with this stupid assertion. The book that is decisive for this, from which you are told that you copied from it, is titled Spirit Training Through Mindfulness. However, you should not be disturbed by this stupid slander because, as you yourself know, it is not based on truth in any way. The truth is that, even if you may no longer be able to remember that Svav translated the Satipatthana method from Pali and Sanskrit scriptures into the German language for you, which Asket then did again in 1954, so you practically had two identical translations. In 1948, at the age of 11, you wrote a manuscript from the translation of Svav in your fourth school class and under the guidance of teacher Darmanin, which was so good that it was copied 200 times by the teacher on a transfer printing machine and sent to many people, including the monk Rat Singh Hanan, whom you later got to know through the help of Asket, and who taught you many things. This monk's name was Mahachohan, which means great master. He was then also the one who made several copies of your work in the same year, 1948, and delivered his equals, from which the first writings were already made. Asket made you a new translation, from which you then revised and newly created your meditation scripture, which you then together with Asket submitted to the monk Rat Singh Hanan in the same year, when Asket brought you to him. He found your work very good and made copies of it again, which he again sent to his peers. 42.1964 then, when you were in Maharoli/India at Ashoka Ashram at Swami Dharmawara in 1964, you reworked your work in 3 months, which Swami Ramana Sarma, called Ananda Mahatma, thus Happy Great Soul, had printed as scripture after he had translated it into English. The scripture was also distributed by him, with 2,600 copies, 2,100 copies more than the monk Rat Singh Hanan had done in 1954. Since 1948, since your first work about meditation, different meditation books have been written with your material, but the individual authors never mentioned them and made it clear that the works were written from your material. On the contrary, the individual authors always claimed to be the authors of the writings or books themselves, and even claimed that they were also the translators of the original writings from Pali and Sanskrit, although Svav and Asket truly did this work. Several of the claimants do not master Pali or Sanskrit.
And what about the person who wrote the book you mentioned? Where did this person get the knowledge of the meditation teaching I wrote?
You mean the Buddhist monk Nyanaponika? He got his meditation wisdom from your scriptures as well as from various others. The translations of Svav and Asket were also available to him and various others.
Yes, now that you talk about these things, I can remember everything as it was during my school days. I did not make a dictation first, but a manuscript from which my teacher, Mr. Lehman, worked out a much shorter dictation for the whole class. It was also my manuscript that he copied and sent. The wise old man in India, Mahachohan, that is to say Rahat Singh Hanan, did not receive my manuscript directly from teacher Lehman, but from a monastery bronze who knew teacher Lehman and to whom he had sent my scripture.
That may be so, if you...
Mahachohan himself explained that to me.
Then it's true. See also 355. Contact, Friday, April 2, 2004, 0.17.
I now have a question about BSE, mad cow disease, which is what we call this disease. You once said that, in principle, this disease originated in sheep and had been transmitted from sheep to cattle. The disease is also transmissible to humans and to all mammals, you said.
That is correct.
In humans, the so-called kuru appears so-called, for example, in Papua New Guinea with the cannibals who eat up their conspecifics and are infected by them if they are infected by the disease. Otherwise, and in the rest of the world, the mad cow disease that can be transmitted to humans is called Creutzfeldt-Jakob syndrome if humans are affected by it. Despite these facts, the responsible doctors, veterinarians and politicians and so on still vehemently deny that this epidemic BSE or mad cow disease or scrapie, as it is called with sheep, can be transmitted to humans. It is also denied that the disease, which Quetzal also called prion disease, is transmitted to other mammals. So this also completely contrary to your interpretations. What is the other syndrome called when the other mammals are attacked by it? I have forgotten the term.
This is the Gerstmann-Strussler syndrome. All forms of mammalian life can be affected by it, and the origin is scrappy or BS. The disease can be transmitted both by inheritance and by blood transmission, as in the case of AIDS, as well as by feces, blood, and meat, by corresponding external contacts with them or by consumption of infected meat, and so on. Anyone who claims that the BSE epidemic is not transmissible to humans, namely the Creutzfeldt-Jakob syndrome and Kuru, and that the Gerstmann-Strussler syndrome in mammals is not due to BSE and scrappy, or that this is even questioned, must be regarded as an irresponsible, inhuman criminal. We have 100% evidence, and therefore the absolute certainty without any doubt that the connections and causes correspond exactly to the information I have just given you. It must be said that the BSE pathogens cannot be destroyed by a simple cooking of the meat, and so on, or by meat meal production. Truthfully, they can only be destroyed by high temperatures, which must be up to 200 or even 400 degrees for mutated pathogens, which have been around for quite some time. The incubation period is also different, and has to be judged according to the constitution of the life form. The incubation period varies between 3 months and 40 years, even up to 50 years. The higher the development of the life form, the longer the incubation period. So it can be up to 40 or 50 years for humans. It must also be said that the disease leaps across species through transformation and change to other mammals of all genera and species, but also to birds and fish, if they are fed with infected food.
Could you perhaps tell me the number of Earth people who are already infected by this plague?
We could not fathom that. We base ourselves on estimates of tens of thousands. However, many of these infected will not be affected by the outbreak, because their deaths will be before. That's actually the way to look at it.
Well, that reminds me, though you said that I was in Marole with Swami Ramana Sama, but that's only true to the extent that he came there several times and I was with him or he was with me. But he himself was elsewhere, and that's where I learned from him. In the Ashoka ashram, which was not in Marole itself, by the way, but a little outside on Gurgan Road, monk Swami Dharmawara lived. He was not Indian either, but a Cambodian who was also the uncle or grandfather of a girl and a boy who lived with him.
I know that I should have known that you insist on great accuracy. I will consider that in the future.
It's all right. I just wanted to make it clear. How is that with you? I mean, in your language use with the term life form or life forms and living beings, do you describe everything that lives, creeps and flies as living beings or life forms?
This is indeed so.
So are bacilli, bacteria, viruses, plants, vegetables, trees and grass and so on also called life forms?
Correct. But what only affects the flora array is not called a living being.
You mean that all living things are called life forms, so all living things in the fauna as well as in the flora area, while the term living things is only valid for the fauna area, to which one must also count humans as well as life down to the microbe area and so on, while in the flora area no herb, no grass and no plant is called living things. The question is why?
All living things in the fauna, even if they are as tiny and inconspicuous as protozoa, and so on, have a form of being independent of location. This is not the case in the pure flora array, and that is not the case with any plant, because it is bound to a place.
Thank you. Next question. It is always doubted that Plejadic spaceships can flee with umpteen times the speed of light in normal space, or that objects can only flee through space with approximately the speed of light without time shifts, because Einstein's theory of relativity simply forbids this. Is the assumption correct that the calculation formulas of this theory of relativity are basically correct but only with limitations, so that they have to be replaced by other and further additions in the end? In my opinion, this should be the case, because if I consider that certain galaxies drift apart at approximately the speed of light without time shifts arising, then it would have to be so for this reason alone, quite apart from my own experience, which I was allowed to experience and make through you during my great journey and during other occasions.
Your assumption is absolutely correct, but I am not allowed to give any official details about it, and therefore no information. The actual facts and formulas must remain a secret for the Earth people for a long time to come, for everyone. You are of course excluded from it.
Thanks for the honor, but if the secret of the actual facts and formulas still has to be guarded so strictly, then I do not want to have any information about it either. One can never know whether I will not even be able to express a word without thought that could reveal the secret. But would it be possible to learn more about the origin and propagation of time streams in the universe?
I have to give you the same answer here as well.
Okay, forget the question. Another question regarding overpopulation. Isn't it true that as overpopulation rises and advances, life itself begins to resist it and gradually produces more and more epidemics and diseases to resist the growing overpopulation? And is it not the case that through the prevalence of human beings, their bodies and organs as well as the entire immune system become more and more susceptible, softer and inadequate, as is also the case with consciousness? Allergies must also become more diverse and more frequent as a result of population growth, with pollution of the entire environment also playing an important role. The people are becoming more and more lenient and softer in their responsibility, even to the point of complete irresponsibility, which is also reflected in the fact that criminals of all kinds are always judged wrong humans and given less severe punishments, often to impunity. The way of thinking and searching for the meaning of life is more and more influenced by sectarian and religious idiocies, which lead to more and more sectarian fanaticism and complete alienation from the world, and so on and so on. Must not nature and life itself ultimately build up such a resistance, for example through epidemics and elementary catastrophes, that people in their overpopulation are wiped out hundreds or billions? I can remember that Quetzal and Simiase once said that such things had happened on other planets before.
That's right. If humans on a planet become too many, then nature and life become involved independently and forcefully contain too many forms of life. Such containment and eradication of the supernumerary forms of life, in this case humans, takes place first and foremost by epidemics, as well as by the fact that the forms of life, in this case again humans, are made weak or even incapable of living by softening the body, the organs and the immune system. Nature and life also defend themselves against an excess of humans and so on by elementary catastrophes.
This was also the case about 6 years ago with Kuhan's people on the planet in the Centauri area, which had 120 billion people and which is somewhat delayed to our time and space.
Yes, that's how it was explained to you.
Do you know the number of people who were wiped out, and how was that humanity decimated?
Only 1.26 billion people still live there today. The population decimation took place exactly according to your statements you just made.
But why could they accumulate or give birth to so many people before nature and life drastically intervened?
Not all people on the planet itself were born, but only their 3.7 billion. Another 62 billion came from planets other than refugees, from 26 different worlds, which were eliminated by an interplanetary war after humans could still flee. Within a few years, the great mass of humanity on the planet in question doubled, while the epidemics and catastrophes eradicated billions of people early on, before the final great deaths began.
Now a question about the Nondakan, known to us as Noah. During our last conversation we also talked about him, but under the name Nonkednosser. Are they two different people, or are they one and the same person? If so, why do you use two different names?
It is the same man who is called Noah on Earth. But Noah is only the short name of Noondakan or Noonkednosser. Noondakan is a name that goes back to the ancient lyric language and was used by the ancient Lyrans on Earth, while the name Noonkednosser was coined and used by the Earth people. So when we talk about Noah or Noondakan and Noonkednosser in this way, we are always talking about the same name, which by the way means man of rest.
From which earthly language then does the name Noonkednosser originate?
The language died out about 80,000 years ago. The name for it was Centelling.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we here on Earth have no knowledge about such things from such old times. But there's another question that comes to my mind about the people who died on the planet in the Centaur area. How long did the whole process take? Do you know about that?
Certainly the time of the Great Death lasted only 21 months.
Ah man, 119 billion people dead in only 21 months. But if nature and life strike once, then they do it thoroughly, but nevertheless. That's madness.
Nature and life do not see it that way, because they are not capable of that. But they are able to impulsively grasp a situation that is dangerous for nature and life, which inevitably leads to corresponding countermeasures. Of course, these are not thought processes, but only logical effects according to the law of cause and effect.
Of course, the law of causality, but it is precisely this law that the terrestrial man disregards, even if deadly consequences will result from it. Perhaps mankind will not be so crassly wiped out as in the case of those we have just talked about, but the great dying will nevertheless spread evil. That is certain for me. In some way this dying will come.
That's also our view.
But first the Earthlings will continue to drive us crazy. If I think only of television, radio and the press, which literally cultivate all evils by glorifying violence through films and books as well as theatre and so on. Also news and other sensational reports belong to it. The more TV, radio and press about atrocities like murder and manslaughter, mass murders, torture, sectarian excesses, wars and revolutions, rape, drug addiction, alcoholism, medication addiction, capital crimes, racial and xenophobic hatred, extremism, neonazism, Ku Klux Klan, death penalty and so on, the more the media are informed about the violence. The more imitators appear, the more they take an example from the reports and events and begin to act equally. TV, radio and newspaper reports and so on about such degenerate events and acts have the same effect as when petrol or explosives are poured or thrown into the fire. The fire is ignited explosively or a huge explosion takes place. Press, television and radio reports are based solely on sensationalism. They must be banned at all costs, freedom of the press or not. In any case, such sensational reports only promote violence and the whole crime as well as contempt for human beings and much more in the same framework. This is also the case with the alleged anti-war films and the endless repetitions of feature films as well as book presentations of factual reports on the cruel events of the Second World War. These films and books also produce the opposite of what is propagated. Instead of thinking and becoming peaceful through these films and books, and so on, man becomes only more aggressive through all the endless nonsense, whereby all evil is even more promoted, namely the desire to cross the desire and the sense to kill, to murder and manslaughter, to torture, torment, most vicious violence, to crime, hate, human trafficking, slavery, prostitution, child desecration and child killing, contempt of man, greed, envy, rape, sexual degeneration, destruction of evolution, destruction of life, extermination, misery and misery as well as all cruelest evils, more exactly as it is shown in these films or illustrated and written in books, newspapers and magazines, as it is said on the radio and shown on television or in theatrical performances. All this, however, is fueled by brutal and horror films which many people are addicted to because their intelligence is not sufficient to recognize the nonsense and the tremendous dangers of human brutalization and consciousness stupefaction. And all this is tolerated by the responsible persons of all governments and often still supported because they are too blind, stupid, uneducated, illogical and even stupid, as a result of which they do not see and do not recognize the truth and the effectivities. They promote all evils and hardships and all misery by branching off subsidies from taxpayers' money and by glorifying violence and all human degenerations, up to and including absolute contempt for man and destruction of life, for film, book and art makers who often glorify violence and all human degenerations through their dubious and often blatant nonsense works, always under the guise that their works are directed against destruction, degeneration, and destruction.
For each word I can only admit to you that each one corresponds to the full truth and reality, and that there is no doubt about it.
My next question: what kind of salutation do you use? Do you use titles, surnames or first names, and what about you and her?
Surnames are common with us, but in a different form than with terrestrial people, but they do not carry any weight in the salutation from person to person, because the salutation only takes place by first name. Otherwise the surname is of course used, for example for the place of residence, or the registry, and so on when speaking with each other personally. However, only the first name comes into effect, whereby also the you is given. A you form, as it is used by terrestrial humans, is alien to us.
Thank you. How does the Plejadisch number system work?
What do you mean?
Do you have the decimal system as we know it? I mean whether you have the 0 and the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9.
That's right. Since time immemorial we have used the system of tens as it is characteristic of all earthly advanced civilizations.
If one can speak of advanced civilizations at all, if one considers the chaos of the most diverse cultures. But tell me, how did the Earthlings come up with this number system?
Through impulsive telepathic teachings from our side.
I should have guessed. In order to obtain higher values, do you also string the numbers 1 to 9 or the 0 together?
That is the case, yes. The earthly number system goes back to our origin.
Of course, how thoughtless of me. Can you record the 10 digits in your spelling for me?
You can read them here on this device here. These are the digits.
Wait, I will copy them out quickly. Simple actually when you look at them. So that's it, thank you. Can you still tell me who or which people of the Earthlings were the lucky ones who received the impulse telepathic teachings for the number system?
The impulse telepathic teachings were given to mathematically gifted people in India.
Aha, and then the Arabs took over the system from them, didn't they?
Yes, but the numbers of the Earth people, the Indians and the Arabs, were formed differently from ours, which we still use today.
Thank you. Another time. What do you think about that? Because of the overpopulation that is rampant on Earth, and enormous cruelty to animals is rampant, especially caused by animal factories and animal transports, as well as by the slaughter of animals. In the animal factories, the animals are forced with the most evil force and are kept under conditions which give mockery to every description. As with the transport of animals, the animals suffer agony, are wounded, die miserably, and are completely destroyed mentally. The animals are even denied that they have a psyche, although the opposite is the case. Even when they are slaughtered, the animals are still in agony. This happens every day to countless millions of animals, including pigs, chickens, geese, rabbits, cattle of all kinds, horses and donkeys, sheep, goats, turkeys and camels, even crocodiles, turtles, birds, ostriches and kangaroos, fish and seafood, and so on and so on. Due to the constantly increasing overpopulation, the demand for animal food is constantly growing and is increasing immeasurably. As a result, the oceans are also emptied of fish, and one species after another is exterminated. Not only is more and more cultivated land being destroyed, forests cut down and destroyed, the environment and nature destroyed, and total exploitation of the Earth's resources practiced, but fauna life is also abused, maltreated, tortured, and destroyed. A monstrosity without equal. It is howling when you think about these things. And all because the Earthling criminally increases and advances his population mass in such a way that only misery and need, degenerations of all kinds, and roaring contempt for humanity as well as contempt for life arise at all?
Of course you are right with every word, and of course I am also full of your opinion, based on real facts.
Is it not also the case with regard to overpopulation that the more densely people live together, as for example in villages and cities, the more susceptible people become to diseases, that they become more and more effeminate, numb and indifferent to each other and to the entire environment, life and nature?
This is also true, yes, also in relation to the inexorably growing overpopulation and the mixture of peoples associated with it.
Of course it cannot be any different. But what do you think about it, or what is behind it? In America, where else could it be, there is a young woman who is spiritually wandering around, claiming to be a Venusian, a woman from the planet Venus, where humans live under dumps.
This person is very well known to us under the name Omnicork, as she calls herself. Her assertions are of course absolute nonsense and correspond to mischievous machinations and even schizophrenic origin.
That's exactly what the lady Omnicork calls herself. A madwoman who mumbles and smacks out her bona fide stupid followers. So it is again something concerning the overpopulation. It is only a statement that has to be pronounced once due to the inexorable growth of the human population. More and more cultivated land is being built over, more and more free nature is disappearing and being destroyed, and with it inevitably the habitat of world animals. Right, tell me, my friend, is it possible that a radio-controlled wristwatch can cause discomfort? As you know, I have such a watch that I wore day and night until 2 months ago. Ever since I had worn this timepiece, the back of my hand was regularly in such pain that I could not even write anymore. 2 months ago the pain even spread over the entire forearm and upper arm, crept into the shoulder and neck behind the right ear, and then caused headaches. Despite diligent smearing and ointments with rheumatism medication, the pain remained and even intensified from day to day. When I pondered what could be the cause of this pain, which was obviously inflammatory in nature, the thought suddenly struck me that perhaps my radio wristwatch was to blame, and the origin because of the radio waves. What do you think?
Your reflection led you to the right solution, I am sure of it. Any apparatus worn on or on the body and dependent on radio waves is extremely harmful to health, and under certain circumstances even destroys the body or organs, or is even life-threatening. A radio-controlled wristwatch is sufficient for this, as you have experienced at first hand. Such timepieces or even telephones and radio intercoms are not recommendable, but very dangerous, if they are not so secured and shielded that the radio waves cannot harm the human body. Radio waves are electromagnetic waves or electromagnetic oscillations, which are dangerous for all life, if they hit this in too high a mass. This danger exists not only in radio waves, but also in power lines, generators and transformers, and so on. The health damage caused to humans and animals by such waves or vibrations can be purely physical as well as psychological and conscious, so from rashes and allergies to cancer and psychological destruction to complete stupefaction, everything is possible. Also all kinds of plants, insects and microorganisms, down to the microbes, and so on, are affected by illness and destruction, if they are influenced in the mentioned way. Any damage is always present, even if it is often not immediately recognized. And it is also the rule that such damage to health is not recognized in its real cause and consequently attributed to a different and inappropriate origin. However, before the dangerous electromagnetic influences cause visible damage to humans, it results that the human magnetic sense is disturbed or very quickly destroyed. This magnetic sense, which is peculiar to humans as well as animals and insects, is already largely destroyed in terrestrial humans, because it has been in constant and very strongly increased influence for many decades by artificially generated electromagnetic waves or oscillations, which go far beyond the normal planet given mass, and which the humans of the Earth generate themselves through their inconsideration. As a result, man has not been able for a long time to apply his magnetic sense and to let it work, whereby he can no longer recognize, no longer grasp, and no longer perceive many things and events of nature, as animals and other forms of life are still able to do, but which, however, are more and more damaged in their magnetic sense by the guilt of man on Earth. Many birds and animals, for example, orient themselves according to their magnetic sense when they carry out their annual hikes or flights to other regions, often walking or flying over many thousands of kilometers. However, the longer these migratory animals and migratory birds become affected by magnetic sensory disturbances, which cause the deaths of an enormous number of birds and animals. Whales, for example, lose their orientation due to ship noises and echo sounders or sonar and so on, and beach somewhere on shores or in rivers, where they perish miserably, which often happens more and more with other water inhabitants. Also, herds of many wild animals lose their orientation more and more often, because their magnetic sense is disturbed, whereby they often flee in panic over rock walls and abysses and fall to their deaths. Thunderstorms, earthquakes and violent elementary storms, and so on develop reinforced magnetic waves or magnetic oscillations as well as volcanic eruptions. These amplified electromagnetic oscillations are registered by the animals and birds and so on, after which they behave accordingly and thus, for example, take flight or seek shelter somewhere. Man is also capable of this if his magnetic sense is not damaged. The human being on Earth, however, has unfortunately lost this ability for a long time, which can also be traced back to his early softening, which progresses more and more, because he distances himself more and more from living together with nature and the creative laws and commandments, and consequently learns more and more.
But how does this rhyme with the technical and medical progress made by the Earth people, by which I mean genetic engineering, genes therapy, genes medicine, genetic corrections and genes manipulations, and so on? Also the creation of an artificial human being as well as clones and human genetic changes belong to this progress, even if many of these things are only in their initial stages.
Despite all degeneration and destruction, progress cannot be stopped. That is an immutable law. At some point there will simply be stagnation, but until then progress will continue for a long time to come and will only decrease very slowly and gradually.
But all the things I mentioned before, they will still be developed further, or even rediscovered and worked out until perfection is reached, or simply the best possible state. This will happen in spite of all stubbornness and prohibitions, as well as concerns and screams that progress inhibitors and especially sectarians and authorities organize, because everything is allegedly against nature and all ethics, and above all corresponds to a blasphemy without equal, which is of course complete nonsense. In my opinion, and after all I know of you, on the one hand the entire development around the genes science and genes manipulation, genes change, genes influence, genes conversion, genes medicine, and in general the whole genes technology and so on will not be stopped, because this is an inevitable consequence of the development. So the entire genetic engineering will find its breakthrough against all the cries of contrast of every kind, and indeed inexorably, although perhaps a little later than just before, but nevertheless inexorably and determinedly in all areas of life. So one day men will also create genetically manipulated clones and artificial humans such as androids, which are equipped with a semi-mechanical, semi-biotechnical body and an artificial biobrain. Just as humans are genetically modified and will undoubtedly soon live much longer and even centuries through genetic modifications and influences and so on, so too will genetic modifications be made to animals and plants as well as to food and medicine and so on. All this is really unstoppable, even if many sectarians, false humanists, false-seeing and false-thinking people today still rise up against it and shout stupidly against it and think up laws against it which should forbid this progress. But such laws are already wrong today, and whoever refuses to do so is acting irresponsibly. It is only right to refuse to do so where creative laws are created by genetic manipulation and in fact where life is destroyed or driven to degeneration in behavior, action, and life. Through genetic engineering, a freedom from suffering and disease can be worked out for man, as well as an enormous number of advantages and facilitations, and an immeasurable progress which can also prevent a further increase in overpopulation and cause much need and misery to disappear if this development is given the necessary space and understanding.
Your words correspond completely to my sense.
Many people deal with this subject, but many others are of the stupid and uneducated opinion that everything is just fantasy. This has been so since time immemorial, which is why Jules Verne and Leonardo da Vinci and many others have always been called charlatans and fantasts. Truthfully, however, it is the case that nothing at all that man can conceive, dream up, conceive, and fantasize about is simply undoable, for truthfully, man can conceive, dream up, and conceive about nothing at all that is not feasible or producible. Everything that man can conceive, dream up, or fantasize about is possible and feasible in a technical or conscious way or in any other way. So there is nothing for man in the whole universe that is not feasible and not producible for him when he imagines, conceives, imagines, or dreams something. The only things that are not feasible, not producible, or not producible for him are delusions, such as religious delusion and fanaticism and so on, as well as illusions, which as delusions and fictitious images and so on of the deluded affect their consciousness.
You expressed that very aptly.
Do you know anything about giants who lived here on Earth? I mean, where they lived.
Of course, you can even find giant skeletons, if you only search for them, like in Cape St. Helena, Ecuador, Lake Titicaca, Mexico, Palestine, and many other places. Various skeletons have also been found at the locations mentioned so far.
I did not know. But I know that the Anakites and the Raphates lived in Palestine, who were also giants.
That corresponds to the correctness.
In one of our last conversations you mentioned the number of deaths caused by Christianity during its work up to December 31, 1992 through wars, church, courts and fanaticism and so on, but you also mentioned the number of human beings murdered by other religions during the last 3,000 years. The question is, are all those murdered also included who were slaughtered by Judaism 3,500 years ago?
Your question refers to the time before 1500 BC.
Exactly this time, I mean.
Moment, these dates are not familiar to me, so I must retrieve them. Yes, here during the time of 1,000 years, further back calculated from the year 1500 BC. A number of 94,630 people were slaughtered, mostly brutally and bestially, by the forefathers of the Jews, the Hebrews and so on. A total of 94,630 people.
A huge number of people who found a violent death in only 1,000 years by religious madness and racial madness, as well as by fanaticism, religious courts, orders of God, religious wars and God judgments, as well as further madness by a single megalomaniac and faith-mad degenerate small people. A number which is almost identical with the people who were murdered in about 200 years by insane sectarians. But even today countless people are murdered by religious delusion and fanaticism, in many cases even in large numbers. Religions and sects are currently more powerful than ever, even if it often appears otherwise. Religions, together with science, politics, crime, technology, the military, and every form of economy, have seized total power. Never before has any form of life possessed such power over the earth as the man of today. And all those people who embody and exercise this earth-constraining power, those who are concerned about it, are so irresponsible that they never feel addressed and never affected. They all live irresponsibly and thoughtlessly at the expense of all their descendants, ours and all humanity. and often these irresponsible ones bear great names, but in many cases they are men who bear great names and titles, only great, irresponsible and common criminals. They all do not give a damn that the universe, the galaxies, the earth, and all forms of life, nature and life itself, and therefore also mankind, are a holy thought and a holy work of creation. The mistaken and guilty not only pretend something to the people, but also to themselves, and many times they think they are better and bigger and smarter than they really are. They have never heard anything about the fact that man should only see himself as great and give himself as he really is, according to the motto, always confess what you really are. These people also want to be praised and only feel comfortable when they are praised and adored, because they are addicted to praise and image. So they cannot understand that they do not have any real friends, but only cripples and parasites that do not dare to criticize and are only concerned with their own welfare and food. They all do not understand that whoever criticizes a man in his deeds, thoughts, feelings, way of life, opinions, and so on in a thoughtful and justifiable manner is his real friend. But whoever praises and omits criticism is the worst enemy.
Your words in the guilty ear.
Even if they hear it, hardly anyone will care about it. Precisely because they are so self-righteous in their irresponsibility that they do not feel affected. But now back again to the alleged abductions of Earthlings by extraterrestrials, especially in America and South America, and recently also in Germany. Such assertions occur again and again, whereby various attempts have been made to prove the truth of the statements by hypnosis. If the assertions were correct, then already more than 3.5 million Earth people would have been examination contacted, and many women, particularly Americans and South Americans, would have been impregnated. It is even absurdly claimed that children have already been born from such impregnations, half earthly, half extraterrestrial, called hybrids.
Everything corresponds to unbelievable nonsense. First, there have been very few incidents of examination contacts for years, and second, there have been no impregnations of Earth women by extraterrestrial intelligences. The so-called hybrids, reported by unreasonable newspaper and journal makers, are nothing more than abortions and mutations of a purely terrestrial nature, which are due to genetic damage, and so on, caused by the parents or by environmental influences of a highly harmful nature, which can be very diverse. There is no doubt that at present there are no descendants on Earth or anywhere else on Earth who have been conceived by extraterrestrials with Earth women or by meerkats with extraterrestrial women. Other claims correspond to infamous lies and slander, no matter whether they come from Elizabeth Clare or from some other lunatics who currently claim this. Even such assertions made under hypnosis usually correspond only to lies and slander, which are either invented by the hypnotized themselves or are tricked in by third parties or even by the person who carries out the hypnosis. In complete contrast to the assertion that people under hypnosis would not lie and cheat and thus always tell the truth, there is the fact that under hypnosis one can lie and cheat just as in the normal state without hypnosis. And exactly this fact is exploited by many in the matter of fuss and alleged kidnappings and so on, because the persons concerned want to make themselves great and distinguish themselves with it. Often only a hypnotic state is faked, which is not difficult for humans and cannot be determined and recognized by the inexperienced hypnotists of the Earth. In this state of pretense, people lie and cheat just as they do in real hypnosis.
All around lies and deception that the beams crack. But it is also constantly claimed that the evil extraterrestrials also massacre animals, for example cattle.
Also, this assertion is based on slanderous assumptions of some lunatics as well as on quite conscious lies and deceptions. If massacred animals are found, especially in the United States of America and South America, this can be traced back to completely natural causes, namely beating and tearing as well as the feeding of birds of prey or predators. Various species of vermin also play an important role, including mutant species. Even certain irresponsible people massacre animals for testing purposes or to stir up fear of aliens, and so on.
3 alien races have been on Earth for several years, you said. Do they also have stations here if they are constantly present?
Only one of the 3 groups is still stationed on Earth for some time, while the other 2 groups appear only sporadically or periodically.
And new aliens, how often do they come into contact with the Earth?
That is quite different. In earlier times it happened only twice that during a period of 100 years more than 2 groups of non-earthly intelligences flew into the earthly space. Usually, such occurrences are only sporadic, as often as many hundreds or thousands of years pass before another alien race reaches Earth. Sometimes several thousand years pass before such an event takes place again.
All the nonsense that is told and spread about UFOs and extraterrestrials on Earth has spread like a festering ulcer, whereby also the actual UFO sightings and observations are denigrated and referred to the realm of fantasy and delusions of the senses.
That is indeed so.
The 3 groups that flee in and out of the earthly space besides you once had real contacts to Earth people. No, but did they have any examination contacts?
That only applies to their 2 groups.
That was actually my last official question, so now we can get to the other things if you do not mind, my friend.
Of course.